Hey guys, you know I can't stay away. I got a throat cold. Sometimes I can barely talk. I'm always coughing. Matt is bedridden and he's just out. He's sleeping it off. Yeah, there's about 3 or 4 of us in our little circle. All got something. We caught something. But I'm jacked up on C1000s, vitamin C, my colloidal water, and whatever else I'm taking. And I'm gonna get this video done. Look at this chart right here, guys. This chart right here shows that this is the cursed earth chronology chart. You have seen it. You guys know I got 360 something charts that show the chronology of the world. None of them deviate. It's a single chronology demonstrated from multiple different mathematical perspectives. This is cursed earth chronology. That yellow bar you see right here, that's the period of history we're talking about in this video. We're talking about the 800 years leading up to the building of the Great Pyramid. This video is not about the Great Pyramid. It's about the history of the Vapor Canopy pre-flood world, all the way up till they gathered together and began construction. So, that's this chart. Next chart, y'all, excuse me. Look at this. This chart here is the 6,348 years of documented Phoenix visitations on the 138-year timeline to May 2040. Here it is right here. This chart. The yellow bar. There it is. That's the little period. That's the period of history we're discussing in this video. That yellow bar right there. It is during the pre-flood world. The 1656 years of the pre-flood world. So, next chart. Look at this. 5239 BC, Nemesis Cataclysm to 2040 CE, return of the Vapor Canopy, Phoenix Transit. You see the arrow on the top right? We are here. This chart was drawn last year, 2022. The bottom, it says 2040 return of the Vapor Canopy. Shows an arrow right there. Now, you can see the Vapor Canopy way back in the past in the pre-flood world. This is a lot of materials covered just on this one chart. But you can see, look at that yellow bar. Look at that yellow bar right there. That yellow bar is the period of history we'll be discussing in this video. Here's another chart, the Archaics chronological chart 5239 BC to 2046. This chart shows the Mayan long count, the Jubilee chart, the Phoenix chart, and the what is it? There's four different timelines combined on this chart. I can't remember what they all are. Oh, the 600-year Anunna timeline. It's basically the Nemesis chronology, the Phoenix chronology, Nemesis X, which is totally different than the Anunna 600-year timeline. Nemesis X appears every 792 years, and the Mayan long count and how it aligns all three of them is right here in this. But look at the yellow box. The yellow box shows this is the period of history we'll be discussing in this video. You're going to be hearing things in this video you've never heard before. So here it is. That covers the charts, except for this fine chart here. Look at this chart here. This is the chart that covers this video. You can see right there 817 years in the little box tucked between 3725 BC and 2908 BC. It's right there, clear as day, 817 years. Guys, that's the history we're discussing in this video. And every date we're discussing in this video is right here on this chart. You can see them all. It was really hard to fit all that on this chart. It's a lot of events. We're going to cover a lot. This is not going to be a short video. So, without further ado, all right, let's get to it. I'm going to leave this chart. I'm going to show this chart over and over. I'm going to leave this chart out. But before we begin, we need to clarify something. Many of you have sent me emails and made comments in the comments section understanding that you have perceived a difference between the Annus Mundi calendar. This year is 5917 Annus Mundi. You have seen a difference in that and the Hebrew calendar, the Jewish calendar. Well, I'm going to tell you now, the Jewish calendar was falsified intentionally. This isn't Jason making this up at all. The Hebrew calendar begins 3761 BC, which would be the year 134 Annus Mundi, meaning the Jewish calendar begins actually 134 years after the Phoenix timeline, which began in 3895 BC, with the total Phoenix destruction that we get in Genesis chapter 1. We don't need to revisit that here. There's several videos about Genesis 1 being 3895 BC. And how it discusses not a creation of the world, but a recreation after a total destructive reset. So, the Jewish calendar begins, and it specifically states in the Talmudic writings that the Jewish calendar begins from the years that have passed since the counting of years began. Now, why is there a 134-year discrepancy? That's easy to answer, although the data is not easy to find. So, I have my notes here, guys. I'm going to be resorting to them. This popularized beginning date finds its origin in the Seder Olam Rabbah, or the Book of the Order of the World, compiled by Rabbi Halafta before the year 160 AD, Common Era. This deliberate deception is admitted by Jewish commentators who claim that the 2nd century AD falsification of the chronology was to prevent people from interpreting Daniel's 70 weeks concerning the coming of the Messiah and the interpretation of Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, as applied to the appearance of Jesus. So, the setting back of 134 years was an attempt to force an interpretation that Daniel's 70 weeks were actually fulfilled not in 30, 31, 32, 33 AD, but in 132, 133, 134 AD. And that Bar Kokhba was the promised Messiah and not Jesus of Galilee. So, this is all admitted in the Talmudic writings, and there are many Jewish scholars who absolutely disagree with the Hebrew year the Hebrew calendar is starting in 3671 BC. So, I'm only addressing this here to let you guys know. Quit sending me emails trying to correct my chronology. You guys don't know what you're talking about. I have thousands of data points that show the correct chronology, and the Hebrew reckoning messes up everything, which is exactly what it was intended to do. So, if these people have lied through Hollywood, have lied through banking, have lied through all their different schemes and all their socio-political plots and stuff for the past 17 centuries, what makes you think they're telling the truth about the chronology? Especially when members of their own sex admit that there was a deliberate changing of the calendar. Yeah. We have all the information, guys. You want to read more about it? Go to The Annals of the World, Archbishop James Ussher, 1657. Very old book. This is a reprint, though. In the back are commentaries. You can look on page 931, 932, and 933. And in the commentary sections, it's going to break it all down to you how the calendar was changed. The Jewish calendar is wrong. And it's wrong because it was an attack against Christianity. It's all here. So, all right. Let's get on with this, guys. Looking at this chart right here, you see the very first date is 3725 BC. This is 817 years before we close this history lesson out. We're going to cover 817 years. A lot happened. So, let's go with, first, let me find exactly what I'm looking for. All right, I got a lot of notes here, guys. We're going to get to it. All right, so 3725 BC was 170 Annus Mundi. 170 Annus Mundi is interesting because it's 2040 months. So the very beginning of this study leading up to the building of the Great Pyramid, we're already confronted with the number 2040. Now remember, I've told you guys in cross-calendrical parallels, we find the same numbers no matter if it's weeks, no matter if it's days, no matter if it's months. or years. We find the same number sequencing and patterning all throughout history, going forward and backward in time, structured in palindromes, and it's phenomenal. It's almost as if the unfolding of historical events is self-referencing. So in 3725 BC, the 170th year after the great cataclysm of Genesis 1 caused by Phoenix, was the 314th year since the capture of Luna, the appearance of the moon in the sky. So, at 40 years old, Seth begins ruling over the Adamites, the Adamu, establishing a kingdom, which implies a very large population. The early Egyptians venerated him as Set, and only in late Egyptian antiquity, as newer gods came into vogue, was the old god Set, or Seth, demonized, falling into disrepute. The Sethite kingdom and center of pre-flood civilization was, in fact, Egypt, and we'll get to that in a minute. That's right, guys. The center of pre-flood civilization in the old world, the center of antediluvian culture was Egypt. So, 3700 BC. Right here on the chart, the next one is it says the beginning of stone cities. And that's pretty accurate, because according to anthropology and basic archaeology, the archaeological model is that 3700 BC is an approximate for when archaeological evidence begins to appear to indicate substantial cultures were now being founded on the surface of the world. So, prior to 3700 BC, for the past 200 years, it has been admitted that there is no evidence of human architecture, structures, large cities, building, urban planning, none of that prior to 3700 BC. But now, in later history, we are finding many ancient ruins, and the date is getting pushed back further and further and further, because anthropologists are basically boxing themselves in from prior not discoveries, but observations and publications. This is why we find these cities in Turkey like Göbekli Tepe and Hisarlik and all these different places that are putting impossibly ancient dates when they can look at the effigies and the artwork on different monuments, and they can easily tell that it's 23rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th and 7th century BC. These structures are not near as old. I have videos showing this and how people are showing videos on the antiquity of Göbekli Tepe, but they're totally ignoring much of the artwork, which is also found in much younger cities and structures all around the world. The whole Ice Age dating of Göbekli Tepe and all those places in Turkey is an absolute lie. You're being lied to. I have videos about it, and I'm more than welcome for you to critique those videos. So, 3615 BC, here's the next one on our deal. 3615 BC was the 280th year after the cataclysm, after the total pole shift of 3895 BC, which caused a new heavens and a new earth, Genesis chapter 1, the 7 tablets of the Babylonian Enuma Elish text, which became the 7 days of creation in Genesis. So, this is 280 years after. It's a long time. It's 7 generations, each generation being 70 years. This was the 424th year since the appearance of the moon. So, in this year, mankind begins falling away from the teachings of Seth and the Adamu, beginning to worship the creation rather than the creator. This completes 7 generations. So, a generation being 40 years, So, prior to this time, there was virtually no strife or crime recorded, and this period is remembered also, uniquely, in the Japanese way of the gods traditions concerning the goddess Amaterasu. It is remembered that there was a falling away in the 7th generation. So, this account, though, is recorded by Flavius Josephus in his Antiquities. So moving on to the next date in this study in the pre-flood world, we get to 3530 BC. This is 3,530 years BC. This is over 5,500 years ago. So This is the 509th year since the appearance of the moon. Canaan, son of Enoch, begins ruling the Adamites at age 40, ending Seth's reign of 195 years. Canaan is wise and knowledgeable, famous for his power over spirits and demons. He was troubled by premonitions of a future disaster and the drowning of the entire world. He had dreams. Note, 40 years is a significant period here. It is now found mentioned twice in this narrative. 40 years is 14,400 days. It's one, which is it's a Fibonacci series number. It's 144 times 100. So 3499 BC, right here on the chart, it's the 5th date. It says on here 60 years of Nemesis X begins. And that's exactly what happened. This is interesting. 3499 BC, Nemesis X begins its first year of 60 years of aphelion, meaning it's very close to Earth. It's only close to Earth for 60 years, and then it's gone for 732 years. When it comes back, that completes a 792-year periodicity. So, and this is unbroken through the history of the world all the way to 2046 AD, which is coming up. So, interestingly, this is 396 Annus Mundi, or 396 years since the cataclysm of 3895 BC caused by the Phoenix. 396 is half of 792. 792 is the periodicity of the Nemesis X object. Calendars are also self-referencing. This is 1260 years before the flood. Remember, in biblical prophecy and in the book of Revelation and in Daniel, we have a very definitive 1,260-year period, and then the end comes in like a flood. That's what the prophetic text says. So this is also the 540th year from the capture of Luna, or 108 times 5. 108 is a pre-flood number of great value. It comes up everywhere with the Anunna and the Great Pyramid. So in 3499 BC, year 1 of the 60 years of the Nemesis X aphelion, when Nemesis X hung in the sky for 60 years. It was there. Everybody saw it every night. It didn't go anywhere. Now, the Nemesis X object enters the sky. It is seen, it enters human memory, and it emerges from the southern stellosphere. It comes out of the deep. And it begins a 60-year traverse across the sky before it vanishes. It vanishes for 732 years. So, now, this 60-year reappearance is unbroken all through history, all the way to 2106 AD, which is 60 years after 2046. Now, 3468 BC is right there. You can see it on the chart. 3468 BC is 427 years after the cataclysm. This is the Chinese traditional date of the birth of the prophet named Fuhi, who foretold of the coming of a savior. This anachronism may refer to Enoch, who was born 195 years later. Remember, we just saw the number 195 years referring to Seth's reign. So, remember, a lot of these numbers can get cross-pollinated from culture to culture as cultures were widening out, expanding, and becoming newer cultures over the passage of time, and yet using still the same source materials. This borrowing is very common. All right, the next date is 3439 BC. You guys know this, especially my Archaics veterans. There's no way you cannot know this date by now. 3439 BC was the year 456 Annus Mundi. It is 1200 years before the Great Flood in 2239 BC, which is 600 plus 600. This is 2 great years. The 3439 BC is the appearance of the Anunna. It is the appearance and arrival of Enki. It is the appearance of the Watchers, the sons of God of the Old Testament. They land on the shores of the Persian Gulf in ancient Egypt. This is 1200 years before the flood, 18 centuries after the Nemesis cataclysm of 5239 BC. This is 600 plus 600 plus 600. Since 5239 BC, the Anunnaki chronology began. This is also exactly the 600th year since the appearance of the moon and the capture of Luna, known as the capture flood of 4039 BC. So, this is a year Nemesis X object completes its 60 years of aphelion, completing its 792-year periodicity, and it disappears now for another 732 years. It will maintain this exact patterning of 60-year appearances and 732-year disappearances until the year 2040, coming up on us real fast. And then 2106, when the chief cornerstone returns in the 6,000th year since the Phoenix cataclysm of 3895 BC. Can't make this stuff up, guys. Every bit of this is so synchronistic. It is so beautifully patterned together, and it's supported by so many data points that I will never fear scrutiny on this chronology. So, let's get to it. All right, the Jasher record says that in this year, 1200 years before the flood, in the year precisely in Jasher of 456 Annus Mundi, which in our calendar is 3439 BC. It says, and in the days of Enoch, the Lord caused the waters of the Gihon to overwhelm them, and he destroyed and consumed them, and he destroyed a third part of the earth, and there was no food for the sons of men, and the famine was severe in those days. So, anybody want to know? This is also recorded in the Jewish Haggadah text. Where it also says that this flood was way before the flood of Noah. So, there's a lot. If you want to know more about this, my Chronicon, my videos, my published books, I go into a lot of detail about the Gihon flood and the fact that the Gihon, according to the ancient Egyptian Copts, was the Nile River in Egypt. So I'm not going by anything modern. I'm going by what they said 17 centuries ago. The Gihon was the Nile River. So, again, we have another reference to ancient Egypt being the center of antediluvian civilization. In the amazing collection of the Holy Tablets, fragments borrowed from Sumerian and Babylonian texts, we find that the Anunna were imprisoned on Nemesis X object, but were only able to get to Earth for a 60-year period. That's amazing. This is in cuneiform tablets. So, I believe it calls the Nemesis X object Nibiru. So, all right. So, Zechariah Sitchin, you guys know I've read all the Earth Chronicles books. I do find value in them. I'm not going to sit here and critique the man to death. But Sitchin notes that the ancient Egyptians preserved a memory of a very great god who visited in the earliest times at a time of bad flooding. He undertook great reclamation of the land, and Zechariah Sitchin asserts that this god was Enki. He built dams, canals, irrigation works. He basically resurrected or built an infrastructure, and he did it along the Nile in Egypt. This is Sitchin. So, Sitchin connects the Sumerian god to the earliest time of Egypt. Zechariah Sitchin was on to something. So, this would be 3439 BC. Remember, The appearance of the Anunna from the deep was not by starships, drop ships, capital ships orbiting the sky. The Galactic Federation did not deliver the Anunna to the ancient shores of Egypt and the Persian Gulf by way of Dilmun. No, they arrived in fleets of ships floating across the face of the deep. The deep is the ocean, deep ocean. The face of the deep is the top. That's where the Anunna came from. Thor Heyerdahl, a sailor himself, remarks, in the 1940s, he said, the real puzzle was that the human history has no known beginning. As it stands, it begins with civilized mariners coming in by sea. This is no real beginning. This is the continuation of something lost somewhere in the mist of antiquity. Thor Heyerdahl. The Astronomer Royal for Scotland named Piazzi Smith noted that the scored line of the descendant passage of the monument of the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt pointed directly at the star Alpha Draconis in the year approximate 3440 BC. His approximate is actually 1 year off of the actual date of 3439 BC. Alpha Draconis was the PreFlood pole star. This is why the dragon with the big eye is found in iconography all over the world in the most ancient ruins and friezes and artwork and statuary and traditions. So, David Davidson, the engineer in 1928 and 29, he followed up this reasoning and he did his own search, and his calculation was 3443 years BC was about the time that shaft pointed at Alpha Draconis. He is very, very close. He's only 4 years off, which is very remarkable when you're doing an archaeoastronomy calculation that goes back over 5,000 years. It's a scientific bullseye. So, he did the same thing. It's in The Great Pyramid. It's Divine Message 1929. So, someone else, extensive chronological calculations of a Leipzig theologian named Dr. Seyfarth, published in the year 1900. In a book, he declared incontestably that the Great Flood ended at his date of 3446 BC, and that the alphabets of the races of the world were invented at this time. This is 7 years before the flood of Enoch in Jasher in 3439 BC. And indeed, Enoch would soon invent a system of writing. And indeed, in the Chinese Dragon King mythos, writing was invented at this time. It all lines up. The only difference here is this theologian, Dr. Seyfarth, thought this was the Great Flood, but it wasn't. It was the Gihon Flood. A lot of confusion, but it's really interesting. His research is published in Atlantis, the 8th continent, and you can find that reference on page 14. So, one of my personal favorites is Ignatius Donnelly. In Ignatius Donnelly, concerning the traditions of Oannes, Ea, the Sumerian god Ea, he wrote, "This is clearly the tradition preserved by a barbarous people of the great ships of a civilized mariner nation, who colonized their coast and introduced the arts and sciences among them." Yep. Over and over and over, when you read the scholarship of the 1800s in the early 20th century, you will find a totally different data points that are being revealed, that these sensationalists, these people that are fleecing the public for money on the Anunnaki and these dropship spaceships, Galactic Federation type invasions of, man, it's all BS. The Anunna came from somewhere else in this world. Yeah, guys, there's some real, absolutely terrible, ancient, alien, shoddy BS research out there. You've got to divorce yourself from this. You're never going to go anywhere in life moving forward in the future if you're going to continue to entertain adult fairy tales. It's BS. There can be no spiritual growth in the entertaining of such fantasy. It's crazy. So, my diatribe over, let's continue with the chronology. The Gihon River is identified by Flavius Josephus as the Nile River in Egypt in his book Antiquities. So now we move on to 3439 BC. Right here on the chart, you can look at, here it is, 3439 BC. Jared means descent. He is born in this year. 3439 BC is the year 460 Annus Mundi. It is the 604th year since the capture of Luna. Now, the PreFlood patriarch Jared is born in this year. He is a holy man of the Sethite lineage who was specifically named in commemoration of the descent of the Watchers from the sky, or as they descended a mountain. Remember, guys, Book of Enoch says they descended from Mount Ardon. So his name, though, is from the root arid, which means descent. Somebody's been real clever. It didn't mean descend from the sky. It means that he is a direct descendant of the new race that appeared. His pedigree, his parentage is of the Anunna. This is a key point because it allows you to understand why the book of Genesis was very, very detail specific on the word Tolida, which was perfect in his generations concerning Noah and why Noah was saved out of so many different people. Now, Jared is a priest and he will father the famous Enoch. This means Enoch too was of the parentage of these visitors. Now, this is in the book of Jubilees, chapter 4, verse 15. Jared's name, descent, it has two meanings for two entirely different time periods. Originally, the connotation was that he was the direct descent of the new visitors, the Anunna. This was the birth of the line that Enoch emerged from, or said another way, this was Enki's offspring, his lineage. This was the seed of Enki. This was... You have to understand, the serpent did not have a negative connotation in the pre-flood world. The serpent was regarded as a creature of wisdom, an interpreter of secret things. The oldest term is ophis, and it means one who sees clearly. So, these were basically the children of Enoch, the children of the serpent seed. This is not the serpent seed doctrine that you're familiar with, talking about the wicked Cainites and the holy Sethites. It's just the opposite. You have been told the exact opposite of the truth. This blood lineage that is represented by the snake is actually a benefactor race that has been demonized by those who conceal their identities, pretending and masking themselves as holy. Now, but those are subject for other videos. And we've already talked about that extensively anyway on my channel. Now, after the cataclysm of the Great Flood in 2239 BC, the Babylonian scribes changed this meaning to infer that the Anunna descended from the stars. Jared from Ared, meaning descent. They changed it to descend. There's a big difference there. The next date is 3395 BC. This is exactly the year 500 since the cataclysm of Phoenix, the new heavens and new earth pole shift, 3895 BC. In this year, which was the 644th year since the capture of Luna, the moon, in this year, Jared is 40 years old. Again, there's that 14,400 year day reference. It's 14,400 days is 40 years under the 360 draconian calendar. Now, Jared is 40 years old and he is distressed over the decadent social conditions after observing how men and women had fallen prey to the Watchers, the Anunna. They had basically adopted their social structure. Jared is shown a vision of God appearing on earth in the last days. And Jared is specifically told that God's appearance among men will transpire in precisely 5,500 years. The number is very specific. This data point is recorded in the book of Adam and Eve, volume 2, chapter 19, verse 1, and chapter 20, verse 15. I have to give you the reference because it's unbelievable. Because Jared, according to the book of Genesis and the book of Jasher, in his 40th year of age, was the year 500 Annus Mundi. You can't make this stuff up. Jared was 40 in the year 500 when he was given a prophecy that 5,500 years in the future, God would visit among men. Remember, guys, the Great Pyramid is a prophecy unto itself of the return of the chief cornerstone in the 6,000th year. 5,500 years plus 500 years Annus Mundi is the 6,000th year, 2106 AD. It is the 60th year of the return of the Nemesis X object. Now, does this mean Enki's returning? I don't know. But he sure is associated to a lot of this material, like the Phoenix and the Pyramid. So, let's move on to the next date is 3373 BC. This is the year 522 Annus Mundi. This is the year 936 Phoenix and 666th year of the capture of Luna, the appearance of the moon. The 66th year since the Anunna arrived. And this is year 1 of the Olmec calendar. Now, this is the start date of the ancient American Olmec calendar as discovered by Dr. H.J. Spindon of Harvard University. Now, he discovered this using, architectural measurements of ruins in Central America belonging to the Maya and the earlier Olmecs. It is widely accepted as the start date of the Olmecs now. 3373 marks the beginning of their reckoning of time. It doesn't mean it's the beginning of their culture or history, but how they reckon time. This date is astronomically aligned with 2 prior significant events. The Olmecs and the Maya both reckon their calendars in multiples of cycles involving 52-year periods. It's called the calendar round. This date is 936 years after the world was totally destroyed and frozen solid in the year 4309 BC, or 52 times 18 years, which began the Phoenix year timeline. It's the very first appearance of the Phoenix. It's all in the Gnostic records, the Trimorphic Proteni and On the Origin of the World, 2 texts that I have cited extensively that actually mention the Phoenix. So, oh, I lost my place. The Olmec start date was also 66 years after the Nemesis X object passed and the Anunna appeared in the world. 66 years is 792 months. The Nemesis X periodicity is 792 years. Again, cross-calendrical parallels, calendars are self-referencing. So, we move now to the year 3359 BC. It's right there on the chart. You guys can follow with me. But on the chart, we now kind of move down to the bottom. Look underneath the timeline where 817 years is. That's where I'm continuing. 3395 BC. All right. In this year, 3359 BC. In this year, Anu, he descended. And remember, in the old Enochian versions, when it says to descend, they were coming down from Mount Ardon. Now, here it is. Anu descended from the mountain. Remember, I've told you in prior presentations. What does that mean? He's coming up from the deep. That's why the Sumerian cuneiform is always saying that the gods emerged from the deep. But in talking about emerging from the deep, it always describes them as coming down a mountain. Is that a conflict? It's not. Because the subterranean bases in the underworld that were populated by the Agigi and the Anunna, two different human factions, the places to ascend were always at high altitudes and mountains. That's where the ingress points are. It's the same way our military works at Cheyenne Mountain. To get to the deep, you got to go up the mountain. Now, it's the same thing with the Anunna. Nothing has changed. Remember, guys, if things tend to be true today, then they're probably true in ancient times as well. So, Anu descended the mountain to oversee Enki's mining operations. Zecharia Sitchin notes that Enki's Anunna had been mining for 28,800 years. This is a terribly ridiculous notion due to Sitchin's continued adherence to a fallacy. The sums in Sumerian texts were of days, not years. Remember, guys, in prior videos, I have cited scholars that show that shars were also used to measure the amount of cargo in cargo manifests from ancient ships. Shar was a unit of measurement, not a unit of time. So, Zecharia Sitchin and all his followers are wrong, just as Berosus was very wrong, because Berosus was a Greek in the Alexandrian library writing about ancient Babylonian studies. He too was wrong. He was 2,000 years too late. So Zecharia Sitchin is wrong for following in Berosus' footsteps. They should have just read Eudoxus or Diodorus Siculus or Strabo, and they would have learned that all these things were divisible by months and days, and then every bit of it would have made chronological sense. So, this 28,800 shars is actually 80 years. It's just 80 years. 80 times 360 is 28,800. It's as simple as that. The year in the Vapor Canopy world was 360 days. The year in the book of Genesis was 360 days. How do we know this? Because Genesis never says that the year was 360 days. But it does say that 5 months was exactly 150 days. All you have to do is extrapolate. 5 months is 150 days, and that means each month in Genesis was 30 days. If there's 12 months in a year, it's 360 days. So simple. Now, Zecharia Sitchin, Hindu, Vedic scholars, and ancient Mesoamerican scholars are all in agreement that all the calendrical systems from ancient India, from the Near East, Egypt, and the ancient Americas, they all have a common denominator. Guess what that is? They're all divisible by 360, not 365, as we have today. That should tell you something. Now, okay, so 80 years after, which is 40 plus 40, we keep seeing that 40 in the pre-flood world, 40 plus 40 after Enki's appearance in 3439 BC, Anu basically gives over control of all of Enki's mining detail stuff to Enlil. So the whole command of the operation was given over to Enlil. So the decision to elevate Enlil over Enki is noted by Sitchin to derive from the fact that though Enki was first born of Anu, he was born of a concubine, while Enlil was later born of Anu's half-sister wife. Enlil was the robber of Enki's birthright. Sitchin correctly observes that the Anunna, their considerations of succession were predicated upon genetic purity. That's the real issue here. All this other stuff Sitchin's talking about is neither here nor there. The real issue here is Enki was a benefactor to normal humans. He cared for normal humans, and it showed. And he didn't treat normal humans as others did. And he was totally against using sophisticated weapons against normal humans. All this is in the Sumerian records. So here was a member of the Anunna who had compassion on Neolithic type humans. So the most acceptable Anunna unions involving coupling or marrying was the marrying of one's half-sister. This is what we find all through the book of Genesis. You guys know Brahma married his consort Saraswati. This translates in the book of Genesis as Abram marrying Sarai, his half-sister. It's the same story, it's the same individuals. So, this actually enlightens us to the true trespass of Enki. He favored the Adamu and started completely different human family by merging his own and the blood of his own men, Anunna, with the local daughters of men. A whole new pedigree that offended the other Anunna, but produced the race of Enoch, produced the race of Jared, produced the race of Noah. That's what he really did. And from the perspective of the common people, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they took all which they chose, and their offspring were men of renown, and Gibberum, and mighty men, men of valor. This means that from the perspective of the locals, having Anunna parentage meant that your sons and daughters grew taller, were fairer, were smarter, were remarkable. They followed the example of their parentage, not of the locals who were living a very Neolithic, dark recessive culture and biology. This is the true meaning of Genesis and the origin of the Nephilim. Because a lot of these, you have to understand, the Anunna were a much bigger people. It also gave rise to giantism, but also those had a lot to do. The text actually reads that this occurred in the days there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men. We don't know if the giants reference is a chronological reference, or if it's absolutely derivative of the unions between the Anunna and the local females. We don't know, because giantism is caused by ambient radiation from massive amounts of volcanism. So we don't know. Now, under Enlil, the Anunnaki themselves mined the ores, suffering for 40 counted periods. This is Zechariah Sitchin. Sitchin finds nowhere any reference to Nibiru or 40 Nibiru orbits. However, he interjects that into the text. It's crazy. His claim that the Anunnaki mined for 144,000 years is absolutely preposterous. He took his interpretation of the Shar, which is 3,600 years, and he multiplied that. It's crazy. It's what he did. So, the Sumerian text reads 40 counted periods. This is important. And Enlil took over for 40 years. This is 3359 to 3319 BC to produce a total of 120 years. That's what it was. The original 80 years that Enki was in charge of the mining, and then the 40 years following when Enlil was charged produces for us 120 years that the Anunna were mining metals. This is a very significant fact because 120 years is the Great Shar. It's also mentioned in Genesis. It is a number mentioned multiple times. So remember, Noah was given 120 years warning before the Great Flood, because this was a major unit of measurement back then. It's 3 40-year periods. 3 generations is 120 years. At the end of the very first 120th year period since the arrival of Enki and the Anunna in 3439 BC. Wait a minute. I got that wrong. I'm sorry. At the end of the very first 120th year period of the Anunna on Earth Since they rebelled in 3319 BC, that started a 1,080-year countdown to the Great Flood. 1,080 years, 108 times 10. What have I told you guys about 1080? What was built before the Great Flood and finished in the year 1080? What took 90 years to build, which is 1080 months? Yeah, guys, 1080 is the number of the Anunna. Always has been. Number of the Watchers. How many pixels is that? 1080 megapixels. What do Watchers do? They see. All right, guys. The associations are everywhere. But we move on now, before we get carried away, to 3322 BC. Because this is the traditional founding of the Chinese civilization by semi-divine amphibious beings who also invented the calendar. Why is this important? Because it fits right here in this 817-year period that I've got marked on this calendar. That's why it's important. It's important to see that the Chinese traditions are lining up perfectly with the Sumerian text concerning the appearance of a benefactor and the building of an infrastructure, the origin of writing, linguistics, calendars, science, mathematics, canal works. It's all here. The Chinese believe the same thing the Sumerians and Egyptians did. The Chinese maintain that the amphibious being with a man's head and a fish tail named Fuhi, or Fusi, founded their civilization. The traditional Chinese date is 3322 BC. It's right here. This is pretty close to the truth, being 117 years after the arrival of the Anunna in 3439 BC. Very close to 120 years. The Chinese can be credited with almost scientific accuracy because we're dealing with over 5,000 years of chronological history. So it's very close. This was the Celestial Emperor, the reign of the Celestial Emperor, the founding of the first Chinese dynasty, almost 12 centuries before the Qi dynasty. The first dynasty began in 2205 BC. Understand, guys, to the Chinese, their actual historical period only began in 2205 BC with the first dynasty. That is about 35 years after the Great Flood in 2239 BC. That's amazing. The Chinese have this record. And what happened before that was the era of the Dragon Kings and the Celestial Emperor before the Flood. The Chinese historical traditions are dead on accurate. So, Fuhi and his consort named Nuwa, they repaired the heavens after a flood, but it wasn't the Great Flood. This was a flood before that. This is the Gihon flood of 3439 BC when Enki appeared. They repaired the heavens. In an ancient Chinese art, Fuhi and his consort, Nuwa, are seen often holding a square and compass as the signs of their measuring and rebuilding the world. Fuhi measured the earth and heavens by degrees and invented the calendar, while his wife, Nuwa, was depicted as having a serpent's body. Fuhi is sometimes confused with Yu, the survivor of the Great Flood much later. Even the Chinese realized there were two floods. It is interesting that Fuhi was said to have come down from on high, not the sky. He came from a high elevation. And his primary concern was to measure the dimensions of the world from east to west and north to south. This is precisely what a very intelligent trier of fact would do after a reset. He would want to measure the perimeters of his world and see what was habitable and what was not. The traditions are fantastic. Moving on to the year 3319 BC. This is 1080 years before the flood, the 720th year since the capture of Luna, which is a Fibonacci number. It's a golden proportion number. It is the 120th year, or the Sumerian Great Shar, since Enki arrived and the Gihon flood destroyed 1/3 of humanity. This is the year 54 of the Olmec calendar, half of 108. So, in the 120th year of their mining labors on Earth, 80 years under Enki, and 40 years under Enlil, the Anunna rebelled. They stopped laboring, they rioted, and they sought to kill Enlil. This was 414 years, a cursed earth period. Guys, I've got many videos on the cursed earth system of 414 years. 414 years is 138 times 3. There is a man, Stephen Jones, biblical chronologist. His arithmetic is absolutely impeccable, and he has documented the history of the world in 414-year periods. His book is called The Secrets of Time. Stephen Jones has some remarkable material. He did not know anything about the Phoenix phenomenon when he wrote his book, which was written well before I ever had any books published. My first published book was 2006. So this was 414 years before the beginning of the Great Pyramid of Giza construction began, which itself started in the year 2905 BC, which was 1080 years before the Great Flood. 2239 BC, caused by Phoenix. So, this is what's interesting. This year of 3319 BC, guys, remember, I've told you, the calendars are just the structuring of the holography, the hologram. I found there's so many interesting things. We just can't go into them in detail right now. We'll do this one. 3319 BC. Its holographic reflection is 9133. It's the absolute reverse of 3119. So, 3319 subtracted from 9133, which is its holographic reflection, gives us the number 5814. For all you pyramid researchers out there, this number should be very, very noticeable to you. 3319 BC, 1080 years before the flood, produces holographically the number 5814, which is the exact height in pyramid inches of the Great Pyramid itself. And 1080 years before the flood is a reference to the fact that the Great Pyramid was completed in 2815 BC, which is the year 1080 Annus Mundi. It was completed in its 90th year of construction, which is 1080 months. So, this also leads us to the ancient Arabic traditions that there's a place in Egypt, an ancient altar that was covered in 1080 eyes. Remember, the eye is the symbol of the watchers, the Anunna, those who see. So, we're moving on. If you want to know more and more details about all this, you got to read my Chronicon. This Chronicon goes into a lot more detail than I'm covering in here. So, 3273 BC is where we're at now. And in 3273 BC, it is the 100th year of the Olmec calendar. Jared fathers the prophet, scholar, future emperor Enoch, the seventh descendant from the Adamu, or Adam, of the Sethite line. Enoch will emerge to be the most famous of all antediluvian personages, remembered by ancient cultures around the world. At this time, the Anunna are raising many sons. Now, the Nephilim, as the Canaanites continued to trade their daughters for Anunna knowledge and technology. These unions produce a race of very large, very intelligent, very fair people. Now, this is 166 years after the descent of the Anunna from the mountains, where they built ships and they arrived in this part of the world that we're discussing now, Egypt, Dilmun, and the Persian Gulf. They arrived with Enki as their navigator, later called Ea, later called Oannes. So, at this time, the Nephilim, which is a whole new race of people. You gotta understand, Nephilim has been demonized after the cataclysm by Babylonian scholars and scribes, later copied by Jewish scribes after the Jews were taken into Babylonian captivity and had exposure to their libraries. So, that's the problem we have here. We have to unpack a lot of disinformation. The descriptions of the Nephilim are of basically a hybrid people between the Anunna and the Neolithic indigenous people that they had come in contact with. 3233 BC, 806th year since the capture of Luna. This is 140 Olmec calendar. At age 40, here it is again, the number 40, 14,400 days or shars. At age 40, Enoch begins his ministry and prophesies against the Nephilim and their Anunna fathers. So, we have almost like a civil war happening. He condemns the Canaanites who now live in total vice, practicing exogamy with the Nephilim families and sharing their culture corrupted by intoxicants and hedonism. Enoch is shown the tables of heaven called the Tablets of Destiny by the Sumerians, divine inscriptions of the past, present, and the future history of the world is all made known to Enoch. Enoch has a problem with how Neolithic society was getting out of control and basically adopting all the ways of the Anunna. This is what was happening. Two separate peoples were becoming one. Now, 3208 BC. This is the 831st year since the capture of Nuna. At 65 years old, the prophet Enoch is now made king of the Sethites. A reign that will last 108,000 days, which is precisely 300 years of 360 days each. He is the center of Sethite civilization before the flood, and the seat of Enoch's kingdom was the geographical area known later as Lower Egypt. So, you can see on the chart, 3200 BC. By this time, according to historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists, 3200 BC, the Bronze Age was in full progress. That's what was going on. Now, 3195 BC is the year 700 since the new heavens and new earth caused by Phoenix in 3895 BC, the Genesis 1 reset. This is the 700th year. In this year, according to the Apocalypse of Adam, found among the Gnostic Nag Hammadi texts of Egypt, Adam revealed to his son Seth the hidden knowledge of God concerning the destruction of the entire world by flood waters as an act of the wrath of God. Seth was told that there would be righteous survivors. Interestingly, this is 230 years before Adam's death in 2965 BC, and 230 years is precisely 2760 months, 2,760 months, or a sum divisible by 138. This was the 13th year of Enoch's reign, the 13th degree of masonry, of Freemasonry, is the Royal Arch of Enoch. This may be when the Anunna taught Enoch the Phoenix chronology. So let's move to 3175 BC. We're moving on in this chronology. 3175 BC was the year 720 Annus Mundi. This is a golden proportion number. This is precession times 10, 72 times 10, and the Fibonacci number, 720, half of 144. So 3175 BC, Sitchin, again, we're going to Zechariah Sitchin. He cites the conclusions of Maria Scholten de Ebneth, who published evidence that ancient South American ruins like Cuzco, Machu Picchu, Quito in Ecuador, Ollantaytambo, and Tiwanaku, I can't pronounce any of those right, were all part of a grid pattern that, when measured against the Earth's obliquity tilt, revealed that the grid was established at or about 3172 BC. She was real close. She was fantastically close. We arrive at 3163 BC. This is 732 Annus Mundi. 732 is the time that the Nemesis X object stays away from our world. It's gone. It's at aphelion, not perihelion. So, this is the 876th year since the appearance of the moon, and interestingly, this is 276 years since the arrival of the Anunna and Enoch, when the world is destroyed in the Gihon flood. This is 138 plus 138. This is also 70 plus 70 plus 70 of the Olmec calendar, or 210 years of the Olmec calendar. This is the 45th year of the reign of Enoch. The Sethites erect several megalithic sites in the northern hemisphere after journeying from their homelands. The Karnak site in France is erected with multiple rows of megaliths as a calendar embodying the concept of a 360-day year. Newgrange is built in Ireland, a gigantic earthworks having geometric alignments and parallels with Stonehenge in England. Now, astrophysicist Tom Ray of Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies discovered that sunlight would have penetrated the back wall of Newgrange's deep tunnel and chamber 5,150 years back from when he calculated this. I believe it was 1986 or 87 when he made this discovery. At the exact moment the sun emerged over the eastern horizon. This date indicated 732 Annus Mundi, or 3163 BC. Now, this is the Vapor Canopy world. They would have not seen actual sunlight. They would have just seen a lightening of the sky. So the builders then moved to southern England and erect Stonehenge 1, which consists of an outer earthworks ring, outer megalithic sarsen circle with huge lintels that fit perfectly together in tongue and groove fashion and with a curvature forming a perfect 360-degree circle. So, the stunning chronometry of the Stonehenge matches that of the Great Pyramid in Egypt, and it is the subject of 2 chapters in my book, Anunnaki Homeworld. I also demonstrate that the builders of the Stonehenge construct specifically built it and arranged it to draw attention to the month of May. This isn't Jason saying that. Scholars have published that. What happens in the month of May every 138 years? The Phoenix phenomenon appears somewhere in the world. Let's move on. 3151 BC is the year 888 since the appearance of the moon. It is 288 since the Anunna appeared with Enki in the Gihon flood. It is also the year 222 of the Olmec calendar. That's a lot of coincidences there. In this year, King Enoch of the Sethites is elected by the people to become emperor over 130 kings and princes, establishing peace between all kingdoms. This is the result of his fame and wisdom and belief that he is in direct communication with the gods. His empire would last 243 years. Now, well, actually, he would rule 243 years until his ascent. He disappeared. Now, that was in 3208 BC. First regnal years, king. All right, so let's go. Now, this also parallels Enoch's first regnal year, which is 243 years before Adam dies in 2965 BC. We're going to get to that it's going to be really interesting here in a minute. The year 3121 BC is 1188 Phoenix year, or 108 times 11, since the very beginning of the Phoenix chronology. This is the year 918 of the capture of Luna. This is 318 since the appearance of Enki and the Anunna at the Gihon flood in 3439 BC. And this is 252 years into the Olmec calendar, which is divisible by 7, 40 times 7, I believe. So, 3121 BC, the Mayan Itza Temple of the Cross calendar begins in this year with the ascension of a goddess who was 800 years old. As will be shown, this is a memory of a Nephilim mother goddess, a matriarch. Now, you can call her an Anunna queen or whatever. Her dynasty would begin as soon as Enoch was gone. She is remembered in the Americas as Spider Woman, 8 legs, Old Woman Weaver, and in India she was called Kali, who had 8 arms. So, you guys also know her. You also know that from a patriarchal perspective, the ancient Egyptians have their memory at the exact same time as Scorpion King, also an arachnid. Our next date is 3113 BC. It's the number 782, Annus Mundi. It is 874 years before the flood. This is the beginning of the ancient Mayan long count calendar of 13 Bactans, each Bactan being 144,000 days. 13 of these Bactans being 1,872,000 days. This system beginning in 3113 BC and ending in the year 2046, as I published in 2010 and 2011, before 2012, when everybody found out that the Mayan long count had been miscalculated. So, yeah, it's a great big I told you so, but nobody in 2012 knew who I was. No one in 2011 was buying my books. My book sales didn't increase until after 2012, when 200 and something authors and books were found to be full of rubbish. Only then were people starting to pay attention to the Archaix material. Now, okay. I want to skip over a lot. A lot of this is way too technical. You can read about it in Chronicon. So, using scientific data obtained from a convention of archaeologists, astrophysicists, botanists, and historians who convened in the year 1997, one of my favorite authors, archaic stamp of approval, is Frank Joseph, and he demonstrates in his research that in the year 3113 BC, a single or series of impacts devastated North America, causing worldwide quakes, temperature and climate changes, drought, and blanketing of cosmic dust. His conclusion is that a cataclysm began the Mayan long count. It is my conclusion that he's correct, and the Mayan collapse of time at the end of the Mayan long count is because a similar cataclysm will end the calendar just like it began it. The end. In this instance, the past is a predicate for the future. In the famous book Uriel's Machine, Night and Lomas show how Enoch is connected to both Newgrange and Stonehenge, and that a comet impacted the Mediterranean Sea about 3150 BC. This is only 37 years off. It's a scientific bullseye. There goes one of my dogs. Causing a magnetic field perturbation, a conclusion totally independent of some discoveries concerning approximately 2150 BC made by Professor Lyrizis of Rhodes University, who also estimates that the world was destroyed at this time. Therefore, 3113 BC was a new world calendar counting down the days, not the years, when the world would be destroyed in like fashion. 2046. Oh, we're getting close. Here's the year 3103 BC. It is the year 792 Annus Mundi since the New Heavens and New Earth pole shift of Phoenix in 3895 BC. 792 is the periodicity of the Nemesis X object. Remember, calendars, cross-calendrical parallels are self-referencing. This is the 864th year before the flood. Remember, the Sumerians adopted the sexagesimal system, and everything relegates to the number 864 in seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years. When you look at them all, I have whole charts in my Anunnaki homeworld that show you when you look at how many seconds are in a day, how many minutes are in a day, how many days are how many hours are in a week. When you look at all the denominators going up to a year, you find out everything is 864 something. It's amazing. So 864 is actually the bridge between time and space. And this can be demonstrated in many ways. I have charts in Anunnaki Homeworld that show this. This is the 936th year since the capture of Luna, divisible by the calendar round, 52. This is also the 270th year of the Olmec calendar. This begins the Vedic Kali Yuga calendar of ancient India, known as the Black Age, that began with the emergence of an 8-armed goddess, a bloodthirsty queen. Her symbol was an upside-down pentagram. Now, for those who don't know, the pentagram was a geometrical symbol identifying the number 1080, because to form a pentagram, it's 10 angles of 108 degrees to form a perfect 5-pointed star of a single line. To do that, to draw a pentagram, you have to draw 10 angles of 108 degrees. This identifies that as 1080. When you take the pentagram and you turn it into a 3-dimensional instead of a 2-dimensional form, then you have 4 points at the base and 1 point at the top, meaning this 1080 identifies the geometry of a pyramid. So, let's see. Here's where it gets interesting. Kali is remembered as the deity by the Hindus, having 8 arms, a deity of destruction. She is remembered as Spider Woman in Old America, but the early Egyptians recalled her as a male deity, calling him Scorpion King, also an arachnid. Now, Kali is a feminine form of the ancient Sanskrit Kala, which means time. Yes, this is all very, very interesting. A lot. So we have, in the year 290 BC, 293 to be precise, the Egyptian priest historian Manetho studied the Egyptian Old Chronicle that cites 113 regnal descents in a 36,525 year period back to Pharaoh Scorpion. But the text is a code, as evidenced by the number 36,525, which is 10 times a solar year. 365.25 times 10 is 36,525. The Egyptians thought they were clever. So, interestingly, this sum is decoded by dividing it by the 13 lunar months that the Egyptians went by. Yeah, they went by a 12 lunisolar division calendar, and they went by a purely lunar calendar of 13 months. So when you divide 36,525 by 13 lunar months, you get 2,810 years. If you add those 2,810 years to 293 BC, when Manetho made these calculations of the 113 regnal descents, then you get precisely the year 3103 BC, the start of the Vedic Kali Yuga system. You can't make this stuff up. So, the date 3100 BC as assigned by Egyptologists as a approximate for the rule of Narmer, who unified all the people into the United Kingdom, is pretty damn precise. It's a scientific bullseye. Narmer is in fact Enoch, described with the epithet Nar from the Sumerian Ner, 600, the Anunna number. So, and Mer is the Egyptian designation for a pyramid. 3100 BC being 3100 BC is precisely Enoch's 108th year as ruler. You can't make this stuff up. So, this is the scholarly imposed approximate of the Narmer palette. 3100 BC, also known as the Victory Tablet of King Menes. The true date, of course, is 3103 BC, which is the Vedic Kali Yuga. Now, it is to be noticed that between 3163 BC and 3103 BC that the world's most mysterious and well-preserved calendrical systems all began basically at the same time. 3163 BC, Newgrange and Stonehenge 1 were lithic calendars describing the three-dimensional reality of the holosphere, identifying the perimeters of time itself by the structuring of the holography. 3121 BC is the Mayan Itza Temple of the Cross. 3113 BC is the Mayan calendar, which counts down to 2046. 3103 BC is the Vedic Kali Yuga calendar. It is not without significance that the three timelines from 3121 to 3103, the two Mayan calendars and the Vedic calendar, they all began within 18 years of each other. And they're all systems that are, the ages in those systems are all divisible by 144,000 days, 288,000 days, 432,000 days. It's not a coincidence, every single one of them. And people like Zecharia Sitchin, people like Andrew Collins, people like Colin Wilson, people like Graham Hancock, these men are supposed to know these things. This chronological material is absolutely necessary for understanding the unfolding of historical events. If you do not know this type of history, then that's when you get dates for Gobekli Tepe in a fictive period of time that didn't even exist. You can call that an ice age. It was just a glaciation. Now, the year is 3039 BC. We're drawing to a close. We're in the last few dates now. 3039 BC is 800 years before the flood. This is the 2,200th year since the Nemesis cataclysm in 5239 BC. This is exactly the 1,000th year since the capture of Luna, when the moon appeared. This is the 400th year of the arrival of Enki and the Anunna in 3439 BC. This is 3039 BC. And Zecharia Sitchin wrote for this year that 288,000 years before the flood, the Anunnaki manufactured a slave race. Basically a hybrid race between them and humans. Now, or the Adamu. Zecharia Sitchin, he stuck to his 288,000 year theory, which is it's preposterous. 288,000 days is just 80 years. That's it. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. It's 800 years, which is nothing compared to 288,000 years, which is so far. We have to suspend our disbelief to the point where history becomes ridiculous. There is nothing 288,000 years before the flood of Noah that would have been important, because in that span of time would have been 100 great floods. It's ridiculous. So 288,000 days, which is the day count system, is the only system known in antiquity, is 800 years. This same 800 years is attested to in the Native American lore. So this was the rise of the matriarchal rebellion in the 400th year since the arrival of the Anunna in 3439 BC, exactly 800 years before the Great Flood in 2239 BC. Remember, guys, in the ancient American traditions, it was the emergence of an 800-year-old goddess that finally took rule after the disappearance of some patriarchal person. This would have been Enoch. Enoch vanished. He ascended. People want to say, religions want to say he disappeared into the sky. He ascended to the sky, but I'm telling you, he went to the same place he came from. In the beginning, the Anunna came down a mountain, and in the end, I promise you, Enki went back up the mountain and went back to where he came from. The underground infrastructure that's been there all along. So, the next year is 2965 BC. This is the year 930 Annus Mundi. It's an important year. Absolutely important year. 930 Annus Mundi. Guys, this is the 138th year of the Kali Yuga calendar, the Vedic calendar. 138 years, the Phoenix year. In this year, Adam died, according to the Genesis text and the Jasher text. 2965 BC, 930 Annus Mundi was the death of Adam. The ancients tolling his years from man's banishment in 3895 BC. This is Stephen Jones' chronology. It's also the Phoenix chronology. It is the new heavens and the new earth that were created by the Phoenix reset of 3895 BC. Now, as Adam is dying, he gathers his sons, and a scribe is brought to record his prophecies. He relates that the flood is coming and will kill everyone but 8 people. This is hyperbole. This is basically a Jewish interpolation. He orders that his body is to be buried at the middle of the earth. I have an entire book published called The Lost Scriptures of Giza, which will show you over 20 references from ancient texts, not just the Bible, that show that the middle of the earth and the center of the earth were ancient geographical designations for where Akuzan was located, the site where the Great Pyramid was built. When Adam died, the Great Pyramid was not yet there. So, the middle of the earth in the pre-flood world was the prime meridian of the antediluvian society. It was 0 degrees latitude, 0 degrees longitude. He commanded that Seth was to carry out the project, his firstborn son of the lineage that would be saved from this destruction. Adam gives Seth an ark with holy relics in it. These relics were to be preserved on the ark, a ship, to endure the deluge, and afterward they were to be placed in a city at the middle of the earth. This is Giza. Though he predicted that the city would be destroyed and plundered after the great flood, the relics would be hidden. The significance of the year 930, when Adam died, is that the Nemesis X object periodicity is 792 years. The Phoenix periodicity is 138 years. 138 plus 792 is 930. Adam, the Adamu, possessed the combined knowledge of the Nemesis X objects, history and future, and that of Phoenix, and these were given to Seth to hide at the Great Pyramid site. So, remember, this is the 108. This happened in the 138th year of the Kali Yuga Vedic calendar. Next date, 2944 BC. The Chinese Shu King text relates that Fu He was alive at this time, an Oriental Noah. This anachronism conveys that some ancient Chinese chronicler knew the duration of Noah's life. Had to have known the duration of Noah's life to have preserved this. And this chronicler began that 950 years around the start of that calendar, that this chronicler had access to similar information concerning the Annus Mundi chronology, beginning in 3895 BC. The Chinese had at one time had an accurate chronology of the Phoenix visitations. That's what the Annus Mundi calendar is. So, 2921 BC. This is the year 974 of the antediluvian world. At age 352, Enoch fathers a daughter named Naamah. She will later be married to the famous Noah, and she is 82 years older than he is. She also becomes famous. She is remembered in traditions in the ancient Americas as well. She almost becomes more famous than Noah once you find out who she is. Okay, so this is Naamah. She's alive after the Great Flood for a while. 2909, last two or three dates, 2909. what happened here. Okay, 2909 BC. This is the 670th year before the flood. This is the 1400th year of the Phoenix chronology, and 204 of the Mayan long count. So, strange dreams and omens afflict the kings and princes and the priests, and Enoch assembles all of them. A remarkable fact preserved also in the Coptic records preserved by Arab scholars. It is concluded in a council that a terrible disaster is going to come upon all mankind, and Enoch secludes himself for many days until God reveals to him the divine instructions of an architectural project. Enoch is to pass on the plans for his people to build the immense instructions of stone at a place called Akuzan in the middle of the earth. This is Giza. Enoch passes on these instructions. Enoch reveals that he is to depart, that he will be seen on earth no more as the construction project continues. For some reason, he received the plans for the building of the Great Pyramid from somebody else. He put those into a comprehensible format as architectural instructions for the Sethite engineers. He himself had to distance himself from the project, meaning the builders of the Great Pyramid had to believe that they were building something else. He had to depart. They continued with the project. When they activated the pyramid, it probably did exactly what they expected it to do, but it did a whole lot more. But they had to be excluded from that knowledge because they were being observed. Now, I go into detail on this in other presentations, guys, so we're not going to talk about that here. So, calendrically, this is a very revealing year. The Sumerian king list specifically records that this date is 670 years before the flood. It was the start date of Ululim, the first of the Anunnaki dynasty to rule over the world. The title Ululim denotes a female demon, an Alu, like a succubus. Ululim reigns for 28,800 shars. These are evenings and mornings or days. This is only 80 years. Her first 70 years of rule over the Canaanites and their kingdoms, as well as the Nephilim nations and the giants, is insignificant until Enoch is removed. Then in 2839 BC, in the latter 10 years of her reign, the unwilling Sethite kingdoms formerly under Enoch yield, or they're physically taken, one or the other. She rules from the pre-flood city of Eridu. In Genesis, it's called Irad. It's called Iram of the Pillars in the ancient Arabic traditions. So, this is 204 years of the Mayan long count calendar that counts down to the 2046 and the worldwide disaster. And it is, this is 204 years. This 204 years, though, is 2448 months. Those of you who have read Chronicon or reviewed my prior presentations, you know the number 2448 is the number of Exodus. It is the number of an escape of a holy people from a wicked land. So 2448 is the number for the exodus of the holy, a departure from a wicked world. It will be shown in this research, this is Chronicon, that the sum of 670 years concerns empires and their beginnings and endings. This Anunnaki matriarch initiates her rule 670 years before the deluge. This is interesting. 1447 BC is the story of the 10 plagues on Egypt and the Exodus, when sea crops in the Danoi, they depart and become the ancient, they became Bit Cumri, the house of Israel. This is the story of the 10 lost tribes and their origin, how they escaped Egypt, all that's in there. But 1447 BC is the exact year of 2448 Annus Mundi. That was an exodus of holy people from a wicked land. What we have here seems to be the referencing of Enoch and many people among the Anunna made their exodus. And when they departed, it left a power vacuum and allowed this matriarch to basically steal control of the Sumerian Pentapolis. So this is the story we get. Now, Phoenix is named in a cryptic passage by Nostradamus concerning the end of a 670-year period. Yeah, because at the end of this 670-year period, because remember, the Sumerian king list is 670 years, 7 kings, but they're controlled by an 8th. The 8th begins to rule, but as soon as the 8th starts ruling, the Great Flood happens and cuts off their rule. Nostradamus mentions this as well. He says, many will die before the phoenix dies. Until 670, his dwelling shall endure. This is not the prophet Nostradamus wrote that. This 670 years concerns the 670 years of the Anunnaki supremacy on earth in the Sumerian king list. From 2909 BC to the Great Flood. Nostradamus specifically wrote in a letter that the Great Flood occurred after a 1242 year period. This is precise. 1242 is divisible by 138. Again, Nostradamus nails it. Like I show you in my published books in prior presentations, Nostradamus was not only aware of the phoenix, he was also aware of the phoenix's number, 138. So the Anunna kingship begins 670 years, which on the Sumerian king list, it says the 7 kings rule for 241,200 shars. Many of you know that. Those of you who have read Zecharia Sitchin, those of you who are die-hard Sitchinites, believing in the whole narrative of the Anunnaki and all that, you know this number. It's the number of the Sumerian king list. It's been published in hundreds of books in German, French, and English. It is 241,200 shars. And at the end of this period of the reign of the 7 kings, or the 8 kings, however you factor it, at the end of this period, the Great Flood destroyed the world. 241,200 divided by 360 of the Sumerian year produces what? All you guys got calendars on your phones. Calculators. 241,200 divided by 360 is precisely 670 years. Every bit of it. Every bit of it is self-referencing. Everything about the past, everything about prophecy, all these ancient citations, all these ancient records, the whole Phoenix phenomenon, the chronology of Nemesis X, cross-calendrical parallels, all this, thousands of data points, and they're all synthetic. So, the final year of our dissertation is 2908 BC. It is the year 987 Annus Mundi. This is the 243rd year of Enoch's empire. Exactly 300 years, 108,000 days since he had begun to rule over the Sethites. Enoch goes with a crowd of people. It says 800,000 in the Jasher text. Enoch goes to the place called Akuzan at Giza. And it says he vanishes. And Genesis says the same thing. God took him. But we don't know that. We weren't there. I believe that he went up the mountain to find to go back to an entrance he knows about, to get back into the deep, the underworld, the origin of the Anunna. That's what I believe. And I find no evidence to the contrary. Remember, we have subterranean bases today that are post-reset, and bases that are underground, whole cities underground that are being prepared for the next reset. If we're doing it today, then it was done in ancient times as well. And this is the actual story of the Anunna and Anunnaki in the Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian and Assyrian texts. This is the story, guys. Not that Sitchinite version that we've been basically brainwashed to believe. Not the Brian, what is this? I can't even remember the dude's name. Carlson, Billy Carson version of history. It's not true. It's not true. You want to know the truth? read Chronicon, pay attention to future presentations of Archaix because I'm breaking it down even more. I'm redoing the Anunna files to the nth degree so we're all on the same page. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and those of you want to see the chart packs, the only thing listed in the comment section below, in the description box, and in the pinned comment for this video are all the chart packs, because that's what we focused in this video. So if you want the chart packs and the timelines and chronologies that go with those chart packs, they're in the links below. Hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. I hope it wasn't too long for you, although I know some of my Archaix vets have been waiting on something like this.